नमस्कार आणि समेस्तांक माय मोगाचो येवकार. आज समेस्त गोंयकारां खातीर खूब खाशेलो असो दीस. गुड मॉर्निंग एवरीवन. It's really pleasure to welcome to all those who are physically and virtually present for this function. We are here to commemorate the birth anniversary of our beloved ex-Chief Minister Government of Goa and former Raksha Mantri to Government of India, late Shri Manohar Parrikar. It's indeed such a pleasure to welcome our distinguished guests, Honorable Chief Minister of Goa, Dr. Pramod Sawant, Honorable Minister for Science, Technology and Waste Management, Shri Michael Lobo, Chief Secretary Government of Goa, Shri Parimal Rai, Secretary for Science, Technology and Health, Shri Amit Satija, Shri Nitin Gokhale, eminent journalist, Dr. G. Raghurama, Director, BITS Pilani Goa, Dr. Gopal Mugeraya, Director, NIT Goa, Dr. Sunil Rao, Director, NIO. Similarly, Dr. Shekhar Mande, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Dr. Randeep Guleria, and Professor Padmanabhan Balram, who will be joining us virtually. A kind request to distinguished guests to light the traditional lamp and inaugurate Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav. We also kindly, warmly welcome family members of Parrikarji. An epitome of integrity and dedication in public life, a true patriot and exceptional administrator, known for his honesty, integrity, and simplicity. One who was defined by his work, always led by examples in public life, and was loved by masses. A sincere wish on this occasion that we may inculcate some of the virtues which the Iron Man of Goa held. Thank you so much. I would like to request all the members of advisory committee to join the dignitaries for the photo opportunity. Thank you so much. I request the chairman, Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav Organizing Committee, Shri Jose Manuel Norona, to escort all the dignitaries on the dais. Honorable Chief Minister, Honorable Minister for Science and Technology, Chief Secretary, Secretary for Science, Technology and Health, Shri Nitin Gokhale, Dr. Sunil Kumar Singh, kindly occupy your seats. Yet another request to you, sir, to welcome the August gathering. Shri Jose Manuel Narona.
Very good morning to all of you. To Honorable Chief Minister, Dr. Savan, Minister for Science and Technology, Mr. Michael D'Souza, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, who is present with us. I'm sorry, Mr. Michael Lobo, correction please. We had said we'll show some clips on the side. Is that movie on? Before we start, just for 2 minutes, let's just have that movie to recollect the visionary steps of Shri Parrikar.
He always looked upon Goa with distinct standpoint. A clear vision of sustainable development and clear technology for the state of Goa. Goa is one of the states with highest literacy rate in the country. And the late Mr. Manohar Parrikar, as its highly educated chief minister, a gifted leader, has facilitated Goa to touch the mark that every progressive mind wishes to encompass. He solidly attempted to stimulate scientific outlook in younger minds. He wished to widen the vision of the individuals at their juvenile phase. Sustainable development of humanity lies in the blueprint sketched by its leadership. Late Manohar Parrikar, with his methodical approach, aimed towards the achievement of sustainable development in Goa. His policies as regards to infrastructural improvement of the state of Goa will signify his ability to perceive the future. Owing to his forte, he was called to serve the nation as the defense minister. While serving from this supreme post, his able and sturdy tactics also bestowed our country with an affirmative spirit. Goa is one beautiful state filled with natural resources. Late Mr. Manohar Parrikar's support to preserve its magnificence is reflected through his long-standing resolution of clean technology. His affection towards science and knowledge resulted into one of the finest talk series that Goa has encountered in the year 2018.
Our government seeks to reinforce Goa's status as a scientific hub of India with a strong focus on not only significantly strengthening scientific education in our state, but also promoting a scientific temperament across the state. And I propose to the Nobel Foundation that we set up an annual Goa Nobel Lecture Series that my government will be very happy to support and organize.
The talk series, Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav, is a most fitting contribution by the government of Goa in memory of our fond leader, late Mr. Manohar Parrikar, who pointed out the trail of science.
A very good morning once again. Having seen that clip of Mr. Parrikar's contribution to science and technology, especially at the Nobel series, when incidentally, just at the end of that series, he was discovered to be ill. Unfortunately, he passed away, and the government of Goa, through Honorable Chief Minister, Minister of Science and Technology, Mr. Michael Lobo, have embarked on this mission of having a science lecture every year for the benefit of children. Unfortunately, this year with the COVID pandemic, we couldn't have a live series, but we're having it virtually. We have Dr. Guleria from AIMS, who will speak perhaps to us on the COVID situation. And we are grateful to our Honorable Chief Minister, Mr. Upendra Joshi, who's here, who coordinated for us and got us Dr. Guleria to speak. We have with us Dr. Balaram, who also is a Padma Bhushan, who was a former director of IISc Bangalore, who will speak to us a little bit later. So we have these two speakers, and second speaker was organized by CSIR, that is Dr. Sunil Singh, who was very gracious enough to help us whenever we approached him. Last year, we had the series spread about around 5 colleges in Goa at Kepe, Sankeli, Perne, Margao, and we had it at NIO. There were almost 7,000 students who benefited from this talk. And like Mr. Parrikar said, hopefully the seed of science and technology will be plowed or grown within the minds of these young children, and we'll have a better stock of engineers for the future. I can't stop but without thanking the government of Goa for the wholehearted support in financing this program. We are telecasting this through webcast. It is on Facebook. It is on the other modes of social media. We have media with us today. We are sure it will be adequately covered, so the children will learn. And one last line for the kids who are listening to this program is what Socrates would have said to Plato. The only thing that I know is that I know nothing. So if we begin to understand that we really know nothing, that is when we begin to really learn something. Thank you and welcome all of you for this program.
Thank you, sir. Warm welcome. Now we shall have a very special event happening here. We have with us Shri Gokhale, a media entrepreneur, strategic affairs analyst, who has authored a book on late Shri Manohar Parrikar named Manohar Parrikar, Brilliant Mind, Simple Life. The book is getting released at the hands of Honorable Chief Minister of Goa, Dr. Pramod Sawant, in presence of all the honored dignitaries. May I request Shri Abhijat Parrikar to join the dignitaries for the release of book, and a kind request to Honorable CM to release this book on very special day. Yeah. Thank you so much. Please occupy this. Shri Nitin Gokhale is an author of more than half a dozen books on military history, insurgencies, and wars, a specialist in conflict coverage. He has very vast experience in journalism for almost 36 years. Kind request to you, sir, to speak about this book, Shri Nitin Gokhale.
Thank you very much. Namaskar, good morning. Dr. Pramod Sawant, Chief Minister of Goa, other dignitaries present here, all those who have joined online, of course, Abhijat here, and Parrikar family, his friends. I'm grateful for this opportunity to come and launch this book here at the hands of the Chief Minister. This was a work in progress for some time. COVID, of course, has affected all of us in various ways. It affected even the preparation of this book and publication of this book. This is only a digital copy, so I must qualify this by saying that this is a digital print. It's not a final print. The final print will take some time because in Delhi, the COVID situation is extremely precarious, and therefore the printing presses are not working to their full potential. And we will certainly send this book. I'm grateful to the Chief Minister, his staff, the Government of Goa, the Department of Information and Public Relations for supporting this book by giving us vital information, photographs, and of course supporting the publication of the book. I don't want to take much of your time because this is mainly about Mr. Parrikar, and I must confess here that I did not know him until January 2015. You would be surprised why I'm writing this book. But in the 28-month period that he was defense minister in Delhi, I was in Delhi since 2006. We got connected through common friends, and we became very close friends. I looked upon him as an elder brother. He looked upon me for as a sounding board during his stint as defense minister, and we became extremely close. So what I know about him is from mostly from his stint as defense minister, and of course our long chats in his house, sometimes in my house, sometimes traveling with him. And what I saw him as not just a technocrat politician, but a man of great integrity, a man who was hardworking, who was only concerned about the well-being of the nation and strengthening the security of the nation. On his watch, we had two surgical strikes, if we may call them. One was in Myanmar across the Manipur-Nagaland border in northeast. The other in Uri, of course, you know how what had happened in Uri, and then of course that movie that was made. That movie did not capture anything that Mr. Parrikar did. Uh, my book hopefully captures that. And of course, the three major decisions he took as defense minister. One was the one rank, one pension for 25 lakh plus ex-servicemen. The second was to procure the Rafale fighter jets for the Indian Air Force, which was facing great shortage in its combat capability. And the third was to initiate defense reforms in a largely moribund and obdurate defense ministry. What he started then in 2016, 17, 2015, 16, and 17 is now coming to fruition. I can assure you, I've done defense reporting for 37 years since 1983. I've never seen such sweeping reforms in the defense ministry, which has now supported Prime Minister Modi's Make in India campaign. And believe me, in another 10 years, India will be not only self-sufficient in defense equipments and platforms, India will be a net defense exporter in the coming 10 years, thanks to Mr. Parrikar and his vision to make India self-sufficient in its defense needs. I don't want to take much of your time. All that I will do is to quote the Prime Minister, whose letter to the family, which was written in December, in March 2019 to his sons. He used one line. He said, Mr. Parrikar was the builder of modern Goa. And I wholeheartedly agree. After that, when I've been speaking to my team and I've been speaking to different people in Goa, we can never fully capture his life because he had a wide range of spectrum of achievements. And that book cannot really capture it. It will all remain in our hearts like it remains, memories remain with me. And I can only say this, that his loss was not lost only to the family or to the state of Goa and the people of Goa, but to this nation also. He was a patriot, he was a nation lover, and he was a man with brilliant mind and simple life. That's what I've tried to capture. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity. And we will remember Mr. Parrikar as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gokhale. Words fall short for the man that changed the dynamics in Goa's progress and development, and it is extremely difficult to put him in words. Hearty congratulations and thank you, Srinitin Gokhale, for making all the efforts to make this book a success. Congratulations. This book is published by Government of Goa, Department of Information and Publicity. Next, we have with us Dr. Shekhar Mande, Secretary DSIR and Director General CSIR. Sir is there with us virtually. I would like to request you, sir, to deliver your address. Dr. Shekhar Mande.
Honorable Chief Minister of Goa, Dr. Pramod Savanji, Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India, Professor Vijay Raghavanji, Professor Balram, Dr. Guleria, my senior colleague, Dr. Sunil Singh, Nitin, and the family members of Shri Manohar Parrikar. It's a great pleasure for me to be here on this particular occasion. I understand that Government of Goa wishes to have a lecture series in the name of Shri Parrikar in the coming years. And last year, when I was visiting Goa, Mr. Morona had come and met me regarding this particular issue. And I think there's a very fitting tribute to Mr. Parrikar for what he has done to the people of Goa and also as the Honorable Minister of Defense between 2015 and 2017. I remember the other day when I ran into Nitin Gokhale, he was very excited about this particular upcoming book. And Nitin actually described many different aspects of Mr. Parrikar that many of us had heard of from here and there, but are truly very memorable. Therefore, it's very befitting that Government of Goa has considered to start a science lecture series in the memory of Mr. Parrikar. And I would like to assure the people of Goa and the Honorable Chief Minister that through our institute in Goa, there's the National Institute of Oceanography. We will do everything possible to support this particular exercise. So once again, we remember Mr. Parrikar very fondly, although I did not know him personally very well. But nonetheless, whatever he has done for the country, whatever he has done for the people of Goa, are very fond memories for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mande. May now request Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India, to deliver his address. Professor K. Vijay Raghavan.
Thank you very much. Honorable Chief Minister of Goa, Dr. Savan, Minister for Science and Technology, Goa, Mr. Lobo, Mr. Norona, other colleagues in Goa, my colleague, Dr. Shekhar Mande, Dr. Balram, Dr. Guleria, and others. It's always a great pleasure to be in Goa and interact with people there, with the lovely ambience, the lovely people, and the attitude of being so welcoming. Unfortunately, this is a virtual interaction today, but nevertheless, better than not having one. We are gathered here to both honor the memory of Dr. Manohar Parrikar, but also to take forward his vision for science and technology in Goa and in the country. I'll very briefly tell you about our interactions with him from the Government of India and how we think they could be of value going forward. There are two major kinds of interactions we had. The Department of Biotechnology some years ago started a program called the Nobel Prize India Series. And there we brought Nobel laureates from all over the world to India to interact with our students and with our teachers across the country, and also brought a Nobel Museum replica over here to showcase the history of science and technology. The idea was not, as many people thought, to have a way by which we could stimulate our scientists to aim for Nobel Prizes. Quite the opposite. The idea was to see how different ways in which scientists develop, and to look at the Nobel laureates not as people to imitate, but as people to emulate. People who broke through traditional barriers and tried to do something different, and sometimes lucked out, sometimes worked hard, and sometimes, had great value. Many of the people who came were people who not only used their badge to convey science, but also to actually proactively engage across the country with students and teachers. The first such meeting was in Gujarat, and it was very, very successful, and a very large number of students from all over the country came. And we thought that the next meeting would be more appropriate to have in a place which is a little more laid back, but also is connected to the country in a big way. So we chose Goa and we went to see uh, uh, Mr. Manohar Parrikar, who was then the Chief Minister of Goa, and he was extraordinarily welcoming. Not only was he welcoming, he personally oversaw the Nobel Prize series and interacted with us, with officials, appointed a high level set of people directly in his office to take care of this. And the meeting was an extraordinary success. Not just the way it was organized, not just the talks about the Nobel laureates, but students from all over India came to visit the museum. It stayed on for a couple of months. Teachers from all over India came and taught each other, and this was a major success. Now, this is the kind of environment and welcoming which is rooted, which was very valuable. I should also add, students from all over Goa came to the museum and to the talks which are held by scientists from all over India in the big amphitheater over the month. Mr. Parikar then suggested that there should be a way by which they should have an anchor of science and technology in Goa so that over time, top scientists from all over India, all over the world come, talk and think about in a calm and beautiful environment about what to do and how to take science and technology in partnership with society, with industry for India's future. So this is something, in addition to the lecture series, I urged that the government of India work with the government of Goa work with the government of India, organizations like the CSIR to try and take this forward. The other kind of interaction we had with Mr. Parikar was about marine biology and biotechnology and deep ocean. As a coastal state, this was very important, and our discussions with him started earlier when he was defense minister and then moved on as chief minister. Uh, this major marine deep ocean mission, in a manner very similar to the space mission, is now ready for takeoff or going into deep oceans, as you might like to better put it, and owes in no small measure to the great support we got from Mr. Manohar Parrikar. There will be major activities in Goa for this deep ocean mission, and this will be something which we will always remember Mr. Parrikar. Now, going ahead, and this is the last part I'd like to say, Goa, for such a small state, has got an amazing range of scientific resources. You have the National Institute of Oceanography, you have the Ministry of Earth Sciences Antarctic Mission, you have the a new IIT Goa which has come, there's the BITS Pilani Goa, and there are many other institutions there. In other words, Goa is not by any means a scientific backwater. It is now time for Goa to take all these institutions and form a glue between them so that they interact deeply on one side with Goa, on the other side with the rest of India, focusing on areas of critical importance to the world today, such as climate change and environment. And on the third side, look westwards towards Africa and elsewhere to see how it can interact to be a more global destination, not just for tourism, but for science, education, research, and tourism. All these are very feasible. It requires talent and depth to be there, and Goa, with its openness and its welcoming nature, can get this talent and depth from anywhere in India and from anywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vijay Raghavan. I now request Minister for Science and Technology and Waste Management, Sri Michael Lobo sir, to deliver his speech.
Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav 2020. We have on the days our Chief Minister, State of Goa, Dr. Pramod Sawant, our BJP Party President, Sadanand Tanawdeji, Dr. K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India. Shri Jose Manuel Norona, Chairman, GPSC. Parimal Rai ji, Chief Secretary, Government of Goa. Dr. Shekhar Mande. Shri Amit Satija ji, IAS Secretary, Science and Technology. Dr. Sunil Kumar Singh. Mr. Gokhale. Dr. Randeep Guleria, Dr. Balaram. We also have our Director of Science and Technology, Levinson Martin, Professor Pradeep Muraskar, close associates of our late Parrikar ji, Upendra ji Joshi, Sandeep ji, who is here, Dr. Shekhar Salkar, Mr. Joglekar, and other dignitaries who are present over here. It gives me immense pleasure to be present during the inaugural function of the second edition of Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav. Today is also the birthday of our beloved former Chief Minister of Goa and former Defense Minister of India, Shri Manohar Parrikar ji. Government of Goa, through my department, that is Department of Science, Technology and Waste Management, has been conducting this prestigious science lecture series annually as a befitting tribute to our former Chief Minister, who had a dream and a vision to take the state to a new high in the field of science, technology and innovation. By organizing this event, government wants to inculcate scientific
of Advisory Committee. Thank you, sir. Now, a kind request to Honorable Chief Minister to present a memento to Chairman of Organizing Committee, Shri Jose Manuel Norona, who has worked dedicatedly and efficiently and has left no stone unturned to make this program a success. Shri Jose Manuel Norona. Thank you so much. May I declare that the inaugural function of this second edition of Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav ends here. We have technical session ahead. Request to all the dignitaries to proceed for refreshment. We may start the technical session in a while, couple of minutes. Hello. Once again, a warm welcome to each and everyone. We are starting with a technical session in which we have eminent speakers like Professor Padmanabhan Balram, former Director IISc Bangalore, and Professor Dr. Randeep Guleria, Director AIMS. To start with, I would like to request Chairman of Organizing Committee, Shri Jose Manuel Norona, to take over.
A warm welcome and good morning once again. The first speaker we have is Dr. Randeep Guleria. In fact, Doctor, I've had the pleasure of seeing you on the national television on the occasion, many occasions because of this COVID pandemic. Very clear in how we go about resolving this issue. We'll hear you for some time. I have with me the director of Pilani Goa campus, Dr. Raghu Raman, who will now introduce you to the audience that we have through social media online. Thereafter, perhaps, Doctor, if you can speak for some time, and then we'll have a small Q&A there. Yeah. Thank you and welcome for this session.
Good morning. Good morning. It gives me a great pleasure in introducing Professor Dr. Randeep Guleria. Sorry. He is a distinguished Indian pulmonologist and is presently the director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He is a distinguished and well-known person of our country. His achievements and recognitions are far too many for me to list in a brief introduction. I will highlight only some of them. Dr. Randeep Guleria completed his MBBS in the year 1982 from Shimla and completed his MD and DM degrees from the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh. He specialized in the area of pulmonary and critical care medicines. Dr. Guleria joined AIIMS New Delhi in the year 1992. He became a professor in the year 2000. In the year 2011, he established the Department of Pulmonary Medicine and Sleep Disorders at AIIMS and was the head of the department till the year 2017. He became the director of AIIMS New Delhi in the year 2017. He has published more than 460 articles and papers with more than 100 research publications in reputed national and international journals. He has delivered more than 350 invited lectures in national and international forums. He is on the editorial boards of some of the leading journals in the area of medicine, such as ERS Monograph, Journal of American Medical Association, Indian Journal of Chest Diseases, and so on. Dr. Randeep Guleria is a member of several committees and associations where his contributions have been immense. As the world is passing through the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, I'll mention a few areas where he is a key member of the strategic committees. Earlier, that is from the year 2015 onwards, he is a member of the Joint Monitoring Group of Government of India on H1N1, pandemic outbreak, bird flu, Ebola virus, etc. Now, he is a member of the National Task Force for the Government of India for COVID-19. Sorry for the Penguin Random House published a book, Till We Win, India's Fight Against the COVID-19 Pandemic, co-authored by Dr. Guleria. Dr. Guleria has been recognized for his excellent achievements by several awards and honors. He was honored by the Government of India in 2015 with Padma Shri, the fourth highest Indian civilian award. He was awarded the Dr. B.C. Roy Award for Eminent Medical Person in 2017. He was called the Doctor of the Decade by the Indian Medical Association in 2018, and many more. Dr. Guleria has dedicated his life to serving people. In one of his interviews in about 10 years back, he said, "I'm there to serve people." He has kept his personal things on hold. And whenever he goes and treats a patient, he said, "All that I want to do is give the best that is possible for the patient." With people like him leading our efforts in fighting the pandemic, we know we are in safe hands and that the country will overcome the challenges. In spite of his busy schedule, he has agreed to deliver the first lecture today. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Randeep Guleria.
And I'm touched by your kind words. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. I'll just see if I can share my slides so that I can. I'm waiting to be given permission to share my slides so that I can just give my talk. But it's really an honor to be here for this Dr. Manohar Parrikar Mahotsav, and for me it's a special honor because I had met him a number of times, especially during the time that he was not well. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
So first, let me once again thank the organizers for inviting me to give a talk on Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav 2020. It's indeed an honor, and I would say that I have known Sir when he was not well, and I met him before that also, but got to really interact with him uh, while he was admitted for quite some time at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and subsequently during his treatment. And I came to admire him for the fact that he was a very soft-spoken, quiet person, but really had a very strong resolve. And even during the time that he was not well, he continued to work and serve the country in the best way that he could. So I would really say that I really learned a lot from him, and my admiration for him is immense. Today, I will basically like to talk upon what has already been mentioned and something which is very, very important, and that is the COVID-19 experience and what we did, what the country did briefly, and what we at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences did as far as this pandemic is concerned, because I think there was a lot of learning and uh, issues that came up which really helped us in the long run. So basically, we know that COVID-19 is caused by coronavirus, and this is as we've already heard, there have been outbreaks of coronavirus in the past. We had SARS in 2002, and then MERS coronavirus in 2012. We also had four other coronaviruses circulating, but they cause mild flu-like illnesses. But those which have a high mortality and can cause severe illness has been SARS and MERS coronavirus before we had COVID-19. The important thing to remember about COVID-19 is that this is a very clever virus. It can reach your nose, upper airways, and it can even reach your lungs, but you will not be aware of it. It really bypasses what we call the innate immunity. And a person may have lung shadows, he may be infectious, but he'll be totally asymptomatic and not aware that actually his lung has a viral pneumonia or his nose and throat are multiplying the virus and actually spreading it. And that's why we have what we call asymptomatic patients, pre-symptomatic patients, and then patients with mild, moderate, severe, and very severe complicated illness. And then we have atypical presentations like the cardiac and the neurological ones. Now, it's very important to remember that this is a virus which has these projections outside, which give it that name of the corona because it has that appearance. And these are the protein, the spike protein. And the spike protein, they were able to attach to the ACE receptor, the angiotensin converting enzyme acceptors. And this actually allows the virus to attach to the host cell and then sort of merge with the host cell or gain entry into the cell. And this is usually in the respiratory tract and the upper respiratory tract mucosa. Once this virus enters the host cell through the ACE receptor, through a receptor binding protein which is present on the spike protein, it causes a direct cytotoxic effect, which causes harm as far as the virus is concerned. It also causes dysregulation of the renin angiotensin-aldosterone system, and this leads to inflammation, vasoconstriction, and alters vascular permeability. It also leads to endothelial cell damage, thromboinflammation, and this is the systemic part which causes inflammation in the blood vessels of the body, and this leads to increased clot formation. So there's increased thrombin production and decreased fibrinolysis, and this leads to endothelial inflammation. This leads to what we call venous and arterial thrombus, clotting in the blood. And then finally, it also leads to what we call dysregulation of the immune response, that the body responds in a very hyperactive manner. And this leads to what is known as the cytokine release syndrome or the cytokine syndrome. So this virus actually causes multiple effects on the human body, and that's why it causes significant pulmonary and extrapulmonary effects. And that's why COVID-19, which starts off as a viral pneumonia, becomes a multi-system disease. And when we talk of multi-system disease, we know that this is a virus which can affect the brain. It has been shown to be present in the kidney. It has a direct and indirect effect on the kidney, the liver, the gastrointestinal tract, and then it can lead to clot formation. It can have cardiac effects. It can affect the pancreas, and it can have dermatological effect. And as we learned about this virus, we started seeing a lot of the extrapulmonary manifestation, which at times caught us by surprise. In the early days of the pandemic, I remember we had a few patients, young patients, who presented with stroke and got admitted and got investigated. And then, because the X-ray showed a patch, when we evaluated them, they had COVID-19, and it caused a huge panic. radiology and the neurology departments. We've had patients who presented with acute myocardial infarction, and it was linked to COVID-19. As I've already said, the virus can start multiplying, and if you look at the viral detection before even the symptom onset, almost 2 to 3 days before, there is an increase in the viral replication, and that can be picked up by PCR tests, and that continues for some time. And even when the virus is non-viable, it still stays in the nasal mucosa, and that's why in some individuals the RT-PCR may be positive for weeks, but the patient may be non-infectious. And then after some time, in the first, almost around the 10th day, 7th to 10th day, the antibody formation starts happening, and we have both what we call the IgM antibodies to begin with, which then rapidly taper off, and then we have the IgG, more prolonged antibodies, which last for a much longer time, which is shown here in the green dotted line. Based on this, various tests are available, and detection tests either look at the viral component, which is either the part of the viral RNA or the protein. And based on this, we have various tests which are being developed. Some of them using the CRISPR-Cas technology is also being developed in India. The Sherlock one is which is abroad, but we also have PCR-based tests, which also is the TrueNat, and the CBNat is also PCR-based tests. We also have tests which look at the antibodies, which look at both detection of the IgG and IgM antibodies, and there's some data which suggests that even the IgA antibodies may be useful as far as early detection of COVID-19 is concerned. Now, when we look at the disease course, 80% of individuals have mild or asymptomatic disease and may actually not really need much problem. About 15% have moderate pneumonitis illness, except for the fact that we do know that those who are elderly and those who have comorbidities tend to have a worse outcome. So we have patients who have mild illness who present with fever, cough, sore throat, malaise. They go on to moderate illness where there is dyspnea, the saturation tends to fall, and the respiratory rate tends to rise. And then they have severe illness. They have what we call respiratory distress syndrome, hypoxemia. They have acute respiratory distress syndrome, and some of them even go on to septic shock. And based on that, there are investigations, baseline investigation, because of the pathophysiology, which I've already said. We look at inflammatory markers, we look at D-dimer to see for increased clotting, and various other tests are done like the prothrombin time, and also to look for cardiac involvement. Treatment usually is based on oxygen and supportive treatment, and various drugs are available, which I'll just come to in a minute. So these are the lab tests which we routinely would do in moderate to severe patients, and we would repeat them usually every 2 to 3 days so as to make sure that these patients are improving, or we come to know whether they're having a downward trend, and therefore we need to treat them more aggressively. Like I mentioned, one of the predictors for disease severity is the comorbidities. And here, if you look at the comorbidities which are mentioned, it looks at heart diseases, diabetes, chronic kidney or liver disease, immunosuppression, obesity, malignancy, and associated chronic respiratory diseases. If you look at individuals who have no comorbidities, and this has been shown now across the globe, even in our center, the mortality is usually less than 1% as compared to those who have comorbidities, where the mortality can vary from something like 5 to 10%. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. And that's why those individuals who are elderly, who have comorbidities, need special care and possibly need to be admitted in a COVID care center or a COVID hospital. The treatment has evolved over the last few months. When we started 10 months ago, the treatment was very, very different from what we're doing today, because we had really no knowledge about how this virus behaves. And now we have some antivirals, although there's a big debate on their utility. Oxygen therapy has turned out to be a very, very important component, and anti-inflammatory, and especially steroids, have also now play a main role. We were initially very worried about giving steroids because the initial data from the H1N1 pandemic suggested that steroids may be linked with a higher mortality. But because COVID causes a cytokine storm and there's a lot of inflammation in the body with thromboembolic phenomena is also occurring, it's been shown that when you give steroids in those individuals where the viremia is coming down, but the inflammation is going up, that is in those individuals who are now having fall in their oxygen saturation or requiring ventilatory support, there is a mortality benefit of giving steroids in that phase of the disease. If you give it too early, it may be more harmful because it may actually promote viral replication. And because of the hypercoagulable state, anticoagulants also have a role. But the main treatment continues to be predominantly. So, like I said, it depends how the disease progresses, and the treatment is actually, I think it's more important to know when to treat rather than what to give. And in the early disease process, when there's viral viremia, a lot of antivirals, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, favipiravir, a lot of drugs have been tried, monoclonal antibodies, but the data is not that strong as far as early infection is concerned. And most individuals will stop here and recover even on their own. About 15% will go on to stage two, the pulmonary phase, where in the early part, you may just need monitoring or low flow oxygen, but it can move on to requirement of high flow oxygen. And in these individuals, when there's a fall in oxygen saturation, there's a role of steroids, anticoagulants. You could consider antivirals like remdesivir and convalescent plasma. Less than 5% will go on to what is known as the hyperinflammation phase of stage 3. And in them, there is a need for giving either higher dose of steroids or anti-IL-6 drugs like tocilizumab or the other drugs which are available. So it's important for us to understand not only what drugs there are, but when to give them, because giving them too early or too late may actually be counterproductive. Now, coming to challenges that one faces in a pandemic, whenever we have a pandemic, there is an issue of triage, domestic care. How do we look at critical care? What should we do? And how do we increase our hospital surge capacity? Now, a lot was done as far as India was concerned. There was a proactive and unified response from states and centers. Very early, on the 11th of January, the government of India introduced a travel advisory, and this was predominantly for China because that's where the pandemic at that time was actually starting. It was still not a pandemic, but outbreak was starting at that time. There was also guidelines for collection, packaging, and transportation of samples. Surveillance guidelines came up, and a containment plan was subsequently put in place once the cases started increasing, and a lot of screening was done at airports, and there was also visa suspension from many areas where a large number of cases were being reported. We also had the Prime Minister's Citizens Assistance and Relief in Emergency Situation Fund. The PM Care Fund was also started, and many of us contributed to it. Lockdown was initiated very, very early on the 24th of March, and this helped us both in preparing for the pandemic. I think that gave us time for our hospitals to really gear up. We used this time to really see how we could have sufficient PPEs, how we could convert our centers into COVID care hospitals, how we could buy more equipment. We bought dialysis machines, ventilators, monitors, and really ramped up our infrastructure as far as ICU and critical care was concerned. Testing was becoming a big challenge because when we started early, there were very few labs which could do testing for COVID-19. And the National Institute of Virology isolated a strain of the novel coronavirus on 14th March, which has helped us tremendously even as far as the vaccine development is concerned, and developing indigenous testing kits, which have really brought down the cost as far as testing is concerned. From 15 labs and less than 1,000 tests, we now have more than 2,200 labs, and we are doing 1 to 1.5 million tests a day. And that is something which is remarkable as far as our response is concerned. Similarly, we are all aware of vaccine that we've started early, and the Serum Institute of India, Pfizer, Bharat Biotech, and even Dr. Reddy's Laboratory and Cadila Healthcare all are having a vaccine which are in phase 3. And by early next year, we should have not only one, but many vaccines which should be available. Also, a lot of manufacturers came forward to ramp up production of PPE. We had our other companies which are actually not making ventilators start making indigenous ventilators. And today we are actually in a position where we can export our PPEs and N95 masks. Infrastructure was also developed, IEC training was done, dashboard was created, and there was a very proactive role in terms of informing the media and disseminating knowledge, especially as far as COVID-appropriate behavior was concerned. Now, whenever you have a pandemic, for any hospital, it's a huge challenge. And this is what we realized way back in end of February, beginning of March, that if you have a pandemic, there will be increased apprehensions, increased consultations for respiratory tract infections, especially those which could otherwise be managed at home. There would be increasing requirement of isolation, and the healthcare system is going to get overwhelmed. And that's why the government and decided that we should start proactively working on dedicated COVID hospitals, COVID ICUs, and also looking at community settings of COVID care centers. This was all done, and we also started working in this area. Also got involved in the national task force, has already been mentioned. We were involved in making the national guidelines for Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. I was a member of the Empowered group created by the PMO for developing strategies for the country, and I had the clinical research group of ICMR as far as research on COVID-19 is concerned. The key challenges that any hospital faced and we faced was protection of healthcare workers. And we realized very early that if we have to really move forward, we have to protect our healthcare workers, because we can't have their morale down or a large number of healthcare workers suffering from COVID-19. So from the end of February and even till today, we have a regular program. And I must say our hospital infection control team has done a remarkable job that twice a day, morning and evening, they hold regular uh, on-site modular training for infection control, whether it's hand washing, wearing a mask, donning a PPE, doffing a PPE, or how they can protect themselves while they're in the hospitals from getting COVID-19, and what they should do. This has really helped, and we realize that this infection control practice doesn't have to be with just the residents, the doctors, or the nursing officers. It has to be for everyone, the sanitation staff, the persons who are involved in the kitchen, the security guards. And we therefore developed a module that, depending upon the need, we will train everyone in the hospital so that they are protected as far as COVID-19 is concerned. This also helped us to motivate our healthcare workers, because there is a lot of concern about healthcare workers regarding getting the infection or taking it to their families. There was also need to immediately increase the intensive care beds and oxygen beds, and training for COVID-related protocols. And also, we were involved in generating awareness on COVID-appropriate behavior among staff and public. So we set up our in-house task force, the COVID-19 task force, and various committees were formed looking at the need that we had. So resource management committee, where how would we pool our human resources? So human resource committee was there. For example, we started training doctors in paramedical subjects, from pathology, microbiology, forensic medicine, to even physiology, on how to have infection control measures and basic management for COVID-19, so that about 25 to 40% of staff who were from other areas rather than from critical care or pulmonary medicine could also manage the increased surge of cases who would come as far as COVID-19 was concerned. We had a medical management committee, an IEC committee, and then a diagnostic management committee, which looked at smooth flow for all the kits. As our testing demand increased, and we had this huge challenge, because our healthcare workers wanted them not only themselves to be tested at times, their family members to be tested. How do we maintain a supply of the kits, the VTM, the viral transport media, the nasal swabs on a regular basis? And that is why this committee had to work very, very hard. And I'm very proud to say that now we have not only capacity for doing the RT-PCR, we do TrueNat, CBNat in emergency, so that we give a report in less than 2 hours. And we have the rapid antigen test, which is available even in the ward, so that any patient or the attendant who has COVID-like symptoms can immediately be tested and isolated, and we don't let a cluster develop in the non-COVID area of the hospital. Since the very beginning, I've been having daily meetings in the morning between 8 and 8:30. These meetings sometimes go on for 3 to 4 hours. In the beginning, they were very, very proactive. We discussed everything, and these are with the faculty, nursing officers, residents, the OT technicians, and problems that they have. We try and resolve them. We listen to solutions also. Some of our residents came up with brilliant solutions of what we could do. It could be simple problems, like the problem of fogging while we go to the OT and wear your goggles. They're not. There was one doctor who had a huge problem of intubating a patient, because he said while I was doing that, the goggles got totally fogged and I was not able to say anything, and I had to take my goggles off, and therefore I exposed myself to COVID-19. So what can we do to really decrease that? Or How do we overnight convert our facility into a labor room? Early in February and March, while we were discussing all of this, one of our residents' wife, who turned out to be COVID positive, and she was term pregnancy. She had to go in for a delivery. What do we do how do we train our gynae department as obstetricians and get them to really do a delivery when we knew very little about COVID-19 at that point in time? So even now we have these meetings and discuss issues like balancing COVID and non-COVID care that we're seeing nowadays. And then all emergency services were continued. We didn't make sure that cancer care was continued, and that was not really compromised. We looked at infrastructure, we looked at human resource planning, process redesign, testing, IEC, research, and academics, because we are at university. Research and academics is also something very, very important on our mind, and we made sure that that does not suffer, and I'll come to that subsequently. In infrastructure, the National Cancer Institute, which had been inaugurated just a year before by our Honorable Prime Minister and was to be a 700 bedded National Cancer Institute, but we are now operating around 200 to 250 beds, was quickly converted into a COVID hospital. And the Vishram Sadan there, which was basically a hostel, had 300 rooms with attached toilet in each room, was converted into a COVID care center. And this helped us immensely because in the early part, when we were admitting all patients, we suddenly had overnight 100 patients who came from a particular area where there was a huge number of individuals, and all 100 tested positive. This was the workers group that had come. And suddenly we had to manage 100 patients which came in buses overnight in our COVID care center. The trauma center also we converted into a COVID hospital. So we had 2 COVID hospitals and 1 COVID care centers. And in the main hospital, the emergency area was converted to a triage area. And we also converted one of our floors into a COVID screening area so that while those COVID suspect patients who were waiting for their test, they were managed there. And if they were positive, they were shifted to the NCI or the trauma center. If they turned out to be negative, they went to the routine wards. So by doing this, we created more than 1,700 COVID beds, and now we have more than 200 ICU beds, and all of the beds in the trauma center and the NCI Jhajjar hospital are oxygen beds. During the peak time, we were having almost 900 patients admitted in our hospital, and this was a huge challenge for us to manage because we were also doing a lot of non-COVID work. Luckily, now it's come down, and now we have between 300 to 400 patients admitted in our center. But it varies from depending on how the cases pan out in the northern part of the country. So this is the National National Cancer Institute Jhajjar, which is a designated COVID hospital. The building at the end is the hospital. In the middle, we have our OPD area. This is the auditorium, and behind that is the research building. And then we have a guest house. Across the road, you can't see that, and this is where we have our hostels and residential accommodation, and that was where the COVID care center was made. This is a photograph from the ground level, and you can see this is the hospital bed, hospital block. This is the OPD block, and this is the Vishram Sadan or Dharmshala, which is coming up through a CSR donation by Infosys, and hopefully by end of next year, this should also be operational for our cancer patients. This is a trauma center. It has 260 beds. All of this center was converted into a COVID hospital. Like I already said, we looked at a lot of equipment, infrastructure, machinery. We realized that dialysis is going to be a problem. So in February, we reordered 5 dialysis machines, and we had 2 in NCI and 2 in our trauma center and 1 in the COVID suspect area. And they were running 24/7 because during the time of the lockdown and during the early part of the pandemic, there was no private hospital which was willing to do dialysis for COVID positive patients. And many patients who were on maintenance hemodialysis and turned out to be COVID positive had a huge problem. And therefore, we were able to manage that load by doing regular dialysis in our 2 centers by having 4 extra machines along with the machines that we already had. We also, like I said, had designation of nodal officers and teams for COVID-19, and developed a roster and rotation for faculty, residents, nursing office, and other staff. And during the lockdown, We arranged for transportation for all the AIM staff, not only from Delhi but from NCR, because that was a huge thing to continue for the hospital to function. And I remember there were more than 50 buses lined around the roads of our campus, the DTC buses, which would take our staff to all parts of the city so that they could all come and be left dropped near their house during that time. And we also had temporary accommodation for doctors and staff. We started our testing facility, RT-PCR, CBNAT, rapid antigen, and we validated a large number of rapid antigen kits, which actually helped them to be rolled out in the government to a large extent. We started what we call our teleconsultation because we realized that two things. One was that non-COVID care should not suffer, and therefore we started providing teleconsultations to all our non-COVID patients because they were scared to come to the hospital and there was a lockdown. Also, we started what we call Contact, the COVID-19 national teleconsultation, which we started in our guest house. It was manned by undergraduate students, faculty, and residents. And this actually handled calls on COVID from all over the country, from doctors, from the public, from patients. And we've had almost 10,000 calls that have been handled. Sorry, almost 97,000 calls which have been handled in this center over a period of time, and we made it in a guest house so that the staff could stay there and the kitchen was functioning 24/7 so that all calls could be handled even if they came in the middle of the night or over the weekend. And we gradually opened our outpatient department also so that once the lockdown was lifted, we could also have some degree of non-COVID care also. So this is just to give you a snapshot of the number of patients that we've seen non-COVID patient care that has been done during the time that there was COVID, so that non-COVID care did not suffer. And now we have this is about a month old. We have now crossed 10,400 as far as total number of patients that we've treated, and we have done almost now more than analysis also as far as COVID positive patients are concerned. Bulk of our patients still tend to be on the relatively younger age group, from around 25 to 60 years of age, unlike the West, where majority of patients tend to be in the much older age group. We also realize that training is very, very important because two things are important. One is to improve the morale and to decrease the chance of infection among our own staff. So webinars, online training modules are developed, videos are developed, and as I mentioned, we have trained more than 13,000 of our employees through modules, which we did in 3-hour session in the morning and evening. And we also have trained more than 2,000 of our doctors, interns, nursing officers through a online platform which we call Saral, which was being used for undergraduate training through our SET facility, which is Simulation, E-Learning, and Telemedicine facility, which is being used for the last few years for undergraduate training and postgraduate training. We tried to address issues which were raised, and this is one paper which looked at concerns of healthcare professionals managing COVID. Their concerns were predominantly risk of infection to self and family and disruption of daily activities, and how we could help them in coping as far as this was concerned. We started what we call the Clinical Excellence Program. This was done at the request of the ministry. And now every state has a Center of Excellence, which we mentor, and they are able to then provide training to the hospitals and COVID care centers in that state. And we have regularly meetings to discuss topics and cases and answer their questions. We started a national e-ICU, which we've now done more than 400 hospitals. We do this on Tuesday and Friday, and we connect with the hospitals which are managing COVID-19 patients. We talk to the doctors there, both the critical care specialists and the physicians, discuss their problems, discuss the latest advances in managing COVID patients and the issues that are coming up. And we realized that there was a lot of confusion in the early days. That people were not sure what to give, what not to give. And this really helped in having a uniform protocol. The idea was basically try to decrease the mortality, and the mandate given to us was to bring the mortality down to less than 1%. We were also very aggressively involved in capacity building for COVID-19 testing, and this was done by us and ICMR mentoring other institutes. We had 14 institutes, which included PGI Chandigarh, NIMHANS, JIPMER, other AIMS, KGMU, With them, we interacted to form a network where we asked these institutes to start asking the medical colleges in that area to start developing COVID-19 testing facility. We took the help of the Medical Council of India, and it became mandatory that all medical colleges, whether private or public, should have a molecular testing laboratory with capacity to do COVID-19 testing. And these mentoring institutes, under our guidance, give them, made sure that the staff there was trained, the equipment was there, and the quality check was done. By doing this, we were able to ramp up and help in the ramping up process. And now, as I said, we have now more than 2,000 labs. And I think this is going to go be useful even in the post-COVID era, where all colleges will now have a state-of-the-art lab which can do not only virology testing, but also be involved in a lot of basic immunology testing itself. And then we started what we call the National Clinical Grand Rounds on Wednesday, which are very popular and have been now, we have a huge hits both on the YouTube and on our AIMS website. We also did video conferencing from SAARC countries, and this was done as part of our international training, and topics covered were management of COVID-19, infection control measures, biomedical waste management, and laboratory diagnosis. And I remember a lot of enthusiasm from various countries, including Nepal and the Maldives, and we were able to interact with doctors there and understand the issues that they were having and see how we could help them. We realized that research is something very important and we should not be left behind. So in end of February, early March, I constituted a research committee for COVID-19 related research. We decided we could not wait for funding to come, and therefore we created a corpus of money for intramural funding. And we asked the ethics committee to hold regular meetings weekly to clear our research projects as far as COVID was concerned. In the beginning, we had more than 100 research projects which were submitted to our expert group, and 63 related to COVID were approved. And they have really done remarkable work as far as these research projects are concerned. And then we decided that since there was such a lot of enthusiasm, the call for proposal would be continuous, and every 4 weeks we review the projects which are submitted over the last 4 weeks and try and see how much we can fund. And we are encouraging interinstitutional support also, and therefore there are many research projects now which have come over the last few months, which are with IIT Delhi, THSTI, and other institutes, IGIB, which is encouraging and which is helping do a lot of translational research. We also have now research from other extramural research grants also. So we announced funding for COVID-related research as intramural on fast track. 63 out of 178 proposals were received and were funded, which includes research on clinical, epidemiological, diagnostic, basic science, education, and learning. And on now more than 200 papers have been published in various national and international journals related to COVID-19. Many of them are research papers and some are related to management guidelines in various disciplines. And like I said, almost 60% of them are based on inter-institutional collaborative research. This is just one which was done by one of our faculty who is in radiology. She's an assistant professor in radiology, but has also done a fellowship on artificial intelligence from IIT Delhi. And she looked at the use of artificial intelligence, deep neural network to analyze chest X-rays for diagnosing COVID-19. And this was something which was very, very fascinating. She looked at X-rays which are COVID positive, done from our main center, NCI and trauma center, around 750 of these. Looked at 300 X-rays of suspect patients presenting to the casualty, and also looked at 300 patients, 300 X-rays which were done in 2018, which were normal or had other pneumonias, but which were not obviously COVID-19 related. And based on that, she was able to develop training of an algorithm, tested it, and was able to show that this had a very high precision in able to say whether this is unlikely to be COVID or this is likely to be COVID positive. And this is something which could be very useful if CT scans are not available, and X-rays could give you some idea that you are likely to be dealing with COVID-19 using radiology along with the testing that is available. Similarly, there was a lot of interest in ivermectin, and therefore a randomized controlled trial has been done. This is now completed and is sent for publication. The RivetCon trial, which was again looking at ivermectin different doses and to see whether it was useful in mild cases. And this was we also looked at comorbidities and co-infections, especially as far as COVID-19 was concerned. One of the things that we were interested in looking at was tuberculosis, the other infections that we see, because there is very little global data as to how do other infections than COVID-19 behave, and are they also a risk factor, especially since tuberculosis is common in our country. And this was analyzed to see whether COVID TB co-infection does lead to higher mortality or not. And we did find that the mortality in our patients was around 12%. And this because there is significant degree of lung involvement in many of our patients who had tuberculosis. We also looked at cancers because the National Cancer Institute was already working on this. And this was also looked at very critically. And again, the mortality was much high. And all these papers are now being sent for publications. A paper which looked at chronic liver disease and looked at patients with cirrhosis and showed that with similar severity of illness, there was a high mortality in acute on chronic liver failure group. They looked at COVID-19 cirrhotics and compared them with historical control and showed a higher mortality if you have underlying chronic liver disease. They also looked at what they were doing now if a patient came with a gastrointestinal bleed. And in the past, a lot of aggressive treatment like endoscopies based treatment was being done. But because of COVID-19, it had moved on to what was called conservative therapy. And therefore, the interest was to see whether that changed the outcome when you use conservative therapy like fresh frozen plasma, PPIs, or drugs to control the bleeding rather than doing invasive procedures. This again showed that one was able to manage patients with medical therapy rather than doing interventions. So this is just to give you a snapshot of the research. We also looked at IEC in various ways, and we developed information booklets for the common public. This was initially in March, which was COVID-19, be careful, not fearful. We had a COVID portal, which was created for information to not only healthcare workers, but for the general public. And a lot of videos were developed, which looked at the management of COVID in the elderly. How do we wear a mask properly? The stigmas related to COVID-19, and how do we wear PPEs. We also had videos which were made, which were uploaded by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and various webinars were conducted, which also we uploaded, and they had a wide variation. It could look at issues of obstetric care, yoga, or mental health issues as far as COVID-19 was concerned. So this is just to give you a snapshot of what was being done, not only in India, but at the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences. And I think this has helped us really manage this pandemic in a way which has brought down our mortality. We have a very low mortality and bring down the number of cases. And we never had a situation where we ran out of beds, or we had a situation where more than one patient, there was need for ventilators or oxygen, and we ran out of oxygen or ventilators as far as the country was concerned. So this is just to give you an idea of what was done as far as AIMS was concerned, and the challenges that we faced in the last 10 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Guleria, for such a informative and excellent talk. Quite a lot of information that you have shared about what the country is doing. We thank you for this excellent talk, but not only the talk, we, on behalf of all the people, extend sincere thanks to you, your team, and people at AIMS for the great things that you are doing. If you have time, we'll take one or two questions, and if you can spend time on answering that. One is regarding, of course, there are two questions related to the vaccine. You mentioned that expected the first release possibly early next year. The question from one of the audience is it advisable, how far is it advisable to meddle with RNA-based vaccines? And what will be its impact on human fitness characteristics and human evolution in general?
So this is a question which comes up because RNA-based vaccines is a new technology, and therefore people are worried that if you're using an RNA and it gets into your genes, will it really alter your genetic makeup? But I think it's important to understand that this technology is probably the safest, because this is not This is taking a part of the RNA, which helps in inducing the body to form the spike protein. But at the same time, this RNA gets degraded very rapidly and therefore cannot really lead to change as far as human uh, genome is concerned, or it can not change your RNA or DNA. So I think that is just a fear that is there. It is not really there. This platform has allowed vaccines not only to be produced in a very early way, but it's been research. It's based on research which has been going on for over a decade as far as the messenger RNA platform for vaccine is concerned. Both for it started with SARS, it looked at MERS, and even for Ebola. But this is the first time that it is now going to be tried as far as field conditions are concerned. But I think there is a lot of safety data, and there should be no concern that this can have long-term effect as far as our genetic makeup is concerned.
Thank you. Second question is, when a patient goes to the hospital, there's a lot of expectation from the doctors. If you look at from the other side, may I ask you, what is that the patient should do to make the life of the doctor less stressful if he's infected and visiting a hospital?
So I think it's important for all of us, and this is for doctors and for patients, to really put yourself in the other person's shoes, because it's important for us to realize the anxiety and at times the problem that the patient may have when he is COVID positive. I've seen patients who are asymptomatic, you talk to them, and even if they have a little bit of pain, which could be a muscular pain, they get very panicky that is it a complication, and am I going to deteriorate? At the same time, patients need to understand that because it is a viral disease and doctors are worried that they may get it or they may pass it on to their family members, some of them who are elderly, they are at times cautious, and sometimes they will wear the PPE or maintain a physical distancing. And some patients get offended that the doctor didn't come close and very close to me, or did not really talk to me from a close distance. So I think it's important for us to realize the issue that we have by putting ourselves in the doctor's or the patient's position and try and resolve that. Secondly, often there is a panic situation, but you must really understand that the doctor is trying to do the best that he can. And when we're dealing with situations where there are critical illnesses involved, have faith in your doctor, and he will do the best he can to get you out of that situation.
Thank you. Last question, if I may. I think India is lucky to have initiated several steps early in the year. And as you clearly demonstrated and explained, these measures have ensured that there is no second wave as yet. But is it time to feel relaxed, or we should still maintain the same seriousness with which we approached in the beginning? Because there is a sense of, when we go around, there is a sense that, okay, abhi sab sort of dila kind of a approach. So what would you advise people in general?
So my advice is we need to just see what is happening in Europe and the US and be very, very cautious. Because if we are letting our guard down, the virus is looking for an opportunity to propagate itself. And the only way it can propagate itself is from human to human spread. So if we let our guard down, if we have crowds, if we don't maintain COVID appropriate behavior, we are promoting super spreading events, the virus will come back, and it will also infect a large number of people. We already know that there is still a significant number of our population which is susceptible. It's not that we have achieved what is the so-called herd immunity. And therefore, I think at least for the next few months, we have to be very, very careful, and we must have aggressive COVID appropriate behavior, because we know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We have a vaccine which should be available in the early part of next year. It would be really unfortunate that because of not having COVID appropriate behavior, we were to lose a close family member of ours at this point in time, when we have a cure or a treatment available just a few months away. Therefore, I think this is the time that we should be very aggressive, because we know that now the end is near, and therefore we should not let our sort of guard down during this time when we just have to hold on for a few more months, and I think things will be much better then.
Thank you, Professor Guleria, once again, on behalf
Thank
of
you.
the organizing committee and all the audience here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, and it's a privilege. Thank you.
We're starting with our second session, and I would like to request Sir Jose Manuel Norona to take over.
Thank you. Thank you. At the outset, my sincere gratitude, appreciation, Dr. Guleria, for such a fantastic and informative technical session. Thank you, Dr. Guleria, once again. We now have with us Professor Balram, who was the former director of IISc, Padma Bhushan. He will be introduced now by Mr. Sujit Dongre before the session can begin. Maybe half an hour, 35 minutes, Professor, and thereafter Q&A, just to get clarity if anyone has any issue or any more clarification that they need from the talk that we did. Thank you once again for being with us today.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Padmanabhan Balaram. Professor Balaram obtained his BSc in the 1967 from Pune University, did his MSc in 1969 from IIT Kanpur, and PhD in 1972 in chemistry from Carnegie Mellon University, USA. He was a research associate at Harvard University from 1972 to 73. He served on the faculty of Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore from 1973 to 2014. He was a director of Indian Institute from 2005 to 2014. He has contributed extensively to the areas of molecular biophysics and chemical biology. He was the editor of Current Science from the year 1995 to 2013, during which he authored over 300 editorials on diverse subjects related to science and scientists. He is the recipient of several awards and honors, including Padma Shri in the year 2002 and Padma Bhushan in the year 2014. He is the recipient of R. Bruce Merrifield Award in 2021 of the American Peptide Society. He is currently associated with National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore, as the DST-YOS Chair Professor. May I request now Professor Balaraman to take over.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much. I am deeply privileged to be able to talk at this symposium held in honor of Sri Manohar Parrikar. I met him only once, many years ago, when we both spoke at an IIT Golden Jubilee meeting. And it was remarkable how energetic and passionate he was when he spoke. I'm also privileged to follow Dr. Guleria at this meeting because the lecture that has just been delivered by Dr. Guleria has been remarkable in its scope, outlining our response to the current coronavirus pandemic and highlighting the role of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. All of us must be immensely grateful to the medical community in India for the remarkable response that they've made to the pandemic. I'm, however, going to address students, and I'm going to talk to them generally about science and nature. Now, nature, all of us know, all of us have our own conceptions of nature. But in science, we are very fond of a journal called Nature, which began in the year 1869. And its very first issue, there was an editorial written by the famous biologist Thomas Huxley. And what Huxley did was, he didn't write the editorial. He instead took an article which had been written by the German poet Goethe many years earlier, several decades earlier. And I will read you just the definition of nature as Goethe saw. He said, "We are surrounded and embraced by her. powerless to separate ourselves from her and powerless to penetrate beyond her. And in this editorial, the English poet Wordsworth was quoted. He was the Renaissance poet who devoted much of his poetry to nature. And what Wordsworth said was, the solid ground of nature trusts the mind which builds for aye. But I want to draw the attention of students to a BBC series which appeared, television series, which appeared in the 1970s. And on that basis, a book also appeared in the 1970s. This was by Jacob Bronowski, the physicist, and it was entitled The Ascent of Man. And I will read you only Bronowski's argument for why he titled his book The Ascent of Man. This is what he said. Among the multitude of animals which scamper, fly, burrow, and swim around us, man is the only one who is not locked into his environment. His imagination, his reason, his emotional subtlety and toughness make it possible for him not to accept the environment but to change it. And that series of inventions by which man from age to age has remade his environment is a different kind of evolution, not biological, but cultural evolution. I call that brilliant sequence of cultural peaks the ascent of man. Bronowski traces the ascent of man. Man is an animal. In biology, man is an animal. But man has distinguished himself from all the other animals of biology. That sequence of cultural peaks has been dominated by advances in science and technology. Bronowski traces this for 30,000 years from the beginning of the invention of agriculture. So the two subjects which I am familiar with are chemistry and biology. And these two subjects together highlight an aspect which is very important. That is the unity of nature. On the left-hand side of the slide, I picture Mendeleev. He erected one of the foundational pillars of chemistry, the periodic table. On the right, I picture Darwin. He erected one of the foundational pillars of modern biology, our ideas about evolution based on natural selection. In the middle of the slide is pictured the various images that you can see on the internet of the coronavirus. The last lecture by Dr. Guleria highlighted the coronavirus pandemic in India. But the coronavirus, you might ask, does it belong to chemistry? Does it belong to biology? It is a collection of molecules. By itself, the virus is an inanimate particle. But once it infects a human being, it is able to reproduce. And reproduction is, in fact, the major attribute of life itself. Chemistry is central to many disciplines. And many years ago, the famous American biochemist Arthur Kornberg, the man who discovered the enzyme DNA polymerase and fired the first shot of the biotechnology revolution, Arthur Kornberg called chemistry the lingua franca of the medical and biological science. Even from one of Dr. Galeria's early slides, you would have recognized the importance of chemistry, because when the coronavirus spike protein interacts with the angiotensin converting enzyme as a receptor, what is happening there is chemistry in all its glory. Biology has been dominated over the last century by Darwin's ideas of evolution, which have often been controversial. But in an article in the American Biology Teacher in 1973, the famous 20th century evolutionist Theodosius Petransky asked this question: does the evolutionary doctrine clash with religious faith? This is because of the constant problem that Christianity had with Darwinism. He answers the question: it does not. It is a blunder to mistake the Holy Scriptures for elementary textbooks of astronomy, geology, biology, and anthropology. Only if symbols are construed to mean what they are not intended to mean can there arise imaginary, insoluble conflict. I show you Mendeleev's periodic table on this slide. Relatively few elements of Mendeleev's complete periodic table are necessary for life. The elements pictured in green are essential for organic and biochemistry. The elements which are pictured in light pink are very often used in biochemistry. Many of the other elements in the periodic table are not. So maybe we have about 24 elements which are critically important for life. So we might ask the question, how did life evolve on Earth? But before we ask that question, we have to ask, how did the elements come into being? And Bronowski addresses this brilliantly. He says, in all the stars, there are going on processes which build up the atoms, one by one, into more complex structures. Matter itself evolves. Bronowski was a physicist. Says, the word comes from Darwin and biology, but it is the word that changed physics in my lifetime. One of the questioners to Professor Guleria asked about evolution. Evolution is a term that everybody must try and understand. How does carbon, the most essential element for organic chemistry and biochemistry, form? Bronowski describes this. Carbon, for instance, is formed in a star whenever 3 helium nuclei collide at one point within less than 1 millionth of 1 millionth of a second. Every carbon atom in every living creature has been formed by such a wildly improbable collision. Life itself is an extremely improbable event. In the year 2000, everybody was celebrating the end of the old century, the beginning of the new century. It was also the end of the old millennium, and it was the beginning of the new millennium. So in the year 1999, 1 year before this happened, the journal Nature asked scientists all over the world to write one-page essays describing what they thought was the most important scientific advance of the 20th century. The one essay which has stuck in my mind all these years is the essay which I show you on this slide. It was written by a Canadian scientist, Václav Smith, and I read one sentence. He says, the world might be better off without Microsoft and CNN, and neither nuclear reactors nor space shuttles are critical to human. But the world's population would not have grown from 1.6 billion to today's 6 billion without the Haber-Bosch process. Today, the world's population is about 7 billion. You might ask, what is the Haber-Bosch process? The Haber-Bosch process is one of the first major industrial processes in chemistry. It's the synthesis of ammonia industrially from gaseous nitrogen and hydrogen. Why is ammonia important? Because it is with ammonia that urea is synthesized industrially. And the synthesis of urea is what led to fertilizers and the first agricultural revolution of the 20th century. It is this agricultural revolution, the use of fertilizers, that increased food production, and thereby the famines of the past began to retreat. The last famine that India had was in the mid-1960s. The second agricultural revolution, of course, came from biology. That is the Green Revolution, with which most of you would be familiar with. Has chemistry done other things? In the mid-1940s, this molecule was synthesized, dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, a complex name, a simple abbreviation, DDT. It got Paul Muller his Nobel Prize a few years of his synthesis. DDT was important because it acted against insects. It acted against insects which ravaged agricultural fields. It also acted against the malarial mosquito which is responsible for the transmission of the malarial parasite. Here was a chemical, simple structure, affecting both agriculture and medicine. This highlights the importance of chemistry. But chemicals can also be double-edged sword. And in the mid-1960s, early 1960s, Rachel Carson wrote this book, Silent Spring. She begins, we are rightly appalled by the genetic effects of radiation. Here she is referring to the effects of the atomic bomb explosions on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the mid-1940s. He then asks, how can then we be indifferent to the same effective chemicals that we disseminate widely in our environment? Rachel Carson's book is the beginning of the environmental movement. Today, the environmental movement is known to everybody. Is simple chemistry and biochemistry important? It can be extraordinarily important, as illustrated by the Nobel Prize in 1945. The Finnish scientist Arturi Virtanen found a method for preservation of fodder. His method was very straightforward. All he had to do was to lower the pH by adding sulfuric and hydrochloric acids. By this procedure, he prevented the growth of harmful bacteria which caused fermentations, which led to decomposition of proteins and the respiration of cells. This stopped. This became a method of preserving fodder through the cold Scandinavian winters in the mid-1940s. It was important enough as a method of preservation to fetch in the Nobel Prize. Today we have other methods of conservation of fodder which use lactic acid bacteria. Because our understanding of microbiology has become so much better, we know what are beneficial bacteria and what are harmful bacteria. There are three pillars of modern biology that I would like to draw your attention to. Biology is all about organisms, humans amongst them, and their behavior. Biology rests on two pillars. Genetics, directed in the mid-19th century by Gregor Mendel, the transmission of characteristics from generation to generation, and evolution, so mid-19th century Darwin, which gives you the idea of how variation and selection lead to evolution. But how are genetics and variation and selection linked together? Darwinian evolution on the one hand and Mendelian inheritance on the other, are linked by chemistry. The chemistry is really based on the mid-1940s discovery by Oswald Avery of DNA as the genetic material, and the early 1950s understanding of its structure by Watson and Crick, which tells you what is the mechanism of replication, transmission of information at the level of molecule. Most important thing for us to understand, Darwinian evolution, variation and selection works not only at the level of organisms, but also at the level of the molecules which determine biology. There are two dominant technologies of our time, information technology and biotechnology. Biotechnology on the right, I can trace its origins to the average discovery of DNA as the genetic material. Information technologies development and early history is all due to Claude Shannon in the mid-1940s. Shannon's famous mathematical theory of information in the late 1940s. And that is what information technology is really based on. Interestingly, Shannon's thesis in 1940 is entitled An Algebra for Theoretical Genetics. Maybe he recognized even then that information and genetics were intimately connected. Today, if you look at biology, maximum amount of information today being generated in biology. When Dr. Guleria's colleagues got all the COVID data together, that will be an enormous amount of data which needs then to be analyzed by the methods of modern information technology. I show you one example of biochemistry, the red chili. The red chili, red pepper, all of them derive their pungency in your mouth from the molecule pictured on the right, capsaicin. But nature makes capsaicin in a very complex way. A large number of chemical steps with a large number of protein enzymes which catalyze these steps. For each step to be catalyzed, you need a gene which is responsible for producing the enzyme. So what this means is that genes are extraordinarily important for almost everything that we see around us in nature. I want to digress and show you an article that I read in the New Yorker early this year It was called as hurting make us human. In Scotland, there was this remarkable patient who was discovered when she went for orthopedic surgery. She felt no pain. She also had a very limited range of negative emotions. She almost never felt unhappy. Why was this so? When this was investigated, it was found that in the brain there is a compound shown on the left as a chemical structure. It is called anandamide. Ananda comes from Sanskrit. Anandamide is produced in the brain, but it is also broken down in the brain. It is broken down by an enzyme. I've already mentioned enzymes. That enzyme has a complex name, fatty acid amide hydrolase. For our purposes, it is simple to recognize that anandamide is broken into two simple components, arachidonic acid and ethanolamine on the right. It is synthesized from these and it is broken down. So the brain synthesizes this molecule, it also breaks it down. This controls your emotional behavior. But where does anandamide act on the brain? Dr. Guleria also already talked about receptors, the receptor for the coronavirus. Similarly, there must be a receptor for anandamide. This is found in the brain. Remarkably, it is the very same receptor on which the molecule tetrahydrocannabinol acts. This is the cannabinoid. This is the active principle of hashish. It is the active principle of marijuana, about which we hear so much today in the papers. It has been used in India for over 3,000 years. We must then look at the scientific discovery of anandamide. This was done in Israel by the Israeli scientist Raphael Mechoulam. Mechoulam is the man who also discovered the cannabinoids, established the structure of tetrahydrocannabinol. He is today on the internet called Mr. Marijuana. What he did was he took 4.5 kilograms of pig brain and from it isolated about 0.5 milligram of a molecule, which he then characterized by the methods of chemistry, which I show you on the right, and the methods of biology, which I show you on the left, and established its activity. He called the molecule anandamide. This was coined from the Sanskrit word for bliss. He was asked in an interview, why did you not use a Hebrew name? And he said, we looked for a Hebrew name, but as you may well be aware, Jews are not very happy. We have a lot of words for sadness and so on, but not so many words for extreme joy. But the point that I want to make today is just this, that if you have a chemical which we call a substrate, and it is to be converted into another chemical which we call a product, you need an enzyme catalyst. To make this enzyme catalyst, we need a gene. So for a multi-step synthesis, almost like an industrial process, you need many, many enzymes and many, many genes. Therefore, for biochemistry, it is at first sight paradoxical that it is probably easier for an organism to produce a new protein than to produce a new small molecule. Dr. Guleria's lecture referred to many small molecules, remdesivir on one side, many other molecules, the steroids on the other. Francis Crick said what I have put on this slide, and he is the high priest of molecular biology. But at the beginning of the 21st century, in the year 2000 itself, the Human Genome Project's completion was announced. Since then, a very large number of genomes have been sequenced. What do these genome sequences tell us? Tell us about the unity of nature, the unity of biology. You can see that on this picture that I have here, which is a tree of relationships built upon genome sequences, humans are not far from chimpanzees. They're not far from rats and mice. They're not far from pigs, cattle, and sheep, horses and dogs. In fact, if you look, pigs, cattle, and sheep are clustered very closely to one another. They belong really to similar families. So here you see the relationships between animals and man. Today, some of these relationships are extraordinarily contentious, lead to a great deal of discord amongst humanity, and therefore biology teaches about unity of nature. Biological data is growing at a faster rate than anybody can imagine. And today, the major challenge for computer scientists is to analyze this data. Dr. Guleria already referred to some of these methods, the methods of machine learning, artificial intelligence, which hold much promise for the future. But in concluding my presentation, and I'm going rather rapidly through this, I want to show you the table of evolution. Evolution is a word which you've already heard. When did the Earth begin? The Earth was formed approximately 567 billion years ago, 5.6 billion years ago. When did life evolve? The first archaebacteria might have appeared somewhere around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. Early bacteria lived in an atmosphere where there was no oxygen. We know today that oxygen is very important. In fact, Dr. Guleria's lecture, for example, highlighted the role of oxygen in the treatment of COVID patients. Respiration is central to our well-being, and oxygen is absolutely necessary. But the early forms of life on Earth did not require oxygen. They grew in an anaerobic atmosphere, and all of biochemistry evolved initially anaerobically. Grand oxygenation event, which is marked here as GOE, about 2.5 million years ago. That happened when the first photosynthetic organisms came and learned how to use sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. And once photosynthesis had evolved, you could now fix carbon in a different way. Plants came very much later, as you can see when you come to the bottom half of my slide and read it. And human beings came very, very much later, almost at the very extreme end of the purple patch that you see in the bottom half of my slide. 1 million years, a little more than that. Today, our understanding of these timescales is driven by science. It is driven by advances in biology, advances in anthropology, advances in chemical analysis, advances in geochemistry. The origins of life on Earth have been investigated in simple experiments, the most famous of which is Miller's experiment. He took a mixture of gases, ammonia, hydrogen, and water, and passed a spark discharge through it. He had a flask in which he collected down mess. On the top of the next slide, I showed you a chromatogram from which he analyzed. He found amino acids. These are the building blocks of protein. The New York Times immediately called this experiment the origins of life experiment. In America, they preserved their samples well. 50 years later, the same sample was taken and reanalyzed by one of his students. Very many more molecules were now discovered. What this tells you is that science progresses, and as the methods of analysis progress, our ability to understand nature becomes better and better. How does biology begin? Biology begins with cells. We must have the first cell. In this universal tree of life, which is shown to biology students, the point that I have marked with an arrow is the root. You might ask, which is the first cell? Rudolf Virchow many years ago said, all cells come from cells. And we can ask, which was the first cell? You can see on this grand tree of life, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, man or human beings are a very insignificant part of biology in all its grandeur. We still do not know what that primordial cell was, and a great deal of work in the recent literature tries to address this question. But that's cells, but in order to form cells, we must have chemistry. Where do all the simple molecules come from? Hydrogen cyanide, an extremely poisonous molecule which was used by Hitler to kill so many Jews. This molecule is also a molecule which can give rise to other molecules of biology. Hydrogen cyanide can polymerize. Hydrogen cyanide can react with other simple molecules to give you the DNA basis. And so chemistry can also evolve. Can we be helped in this evolution on Earth? Yes, we can. Some molecules might come to us from the comets, and today advances in astronomy and astrophysics allow you to analyze the chemistry of the comets, and one knows how much of formaldehyde, how much of hydrogen cyanide, for example, present in inhaled popcorn. If these kinds of molecules are available, and recent literature suggests that you can do much more complex chemistry, and I just show you the slide to tell you that biochemistry might in fact evolve completely in nature from very simple chemicals. But the vital question, and that's the title of the book that I referred to you, ask is, why is life the way it is? Bacteria evolved into complex life just once in 4 billion years of life. They share all the properties in all life forms, sex, aging, death. If life evolved on other planets, would it be the same or completely different? This, of course, is a grand question from my task. But in concluding this presentation, I want to show you something I picked off the internet. 200,000 years ago, there were hardly any human beings on Earth. The precursors of human beings are only in East Africa. That is what modern science tells us, in that grey shaded area that you see. 32,000 BC, they have spread to many parts of the world. The Americas are still largely unpopulated. By the year 1 of the modern era, you could see that civilizations have grown. China, India, Persia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, all of them. But today, we can understand using DNA analysis how populations have migrated. And I refer you to this book by Tony Joseph, a journalist who wrote a very interesting book on the early Indians. He says that the early Indians draw from a fascination with the Harappan civilization. And he says it has become possible because of the new field of population genetics, thanks to the analysis of DNA extracted from individuals who lived tens of thousands of years ago. This is what modern science can do today. And to tell you that this science is very modern, I retired formally in the year 2014. That year, very few ancient DNA samples had been analyzed. Now you can see that the growth has been exponential. So our understanding of human evolution and human dispersion over the globe will become very much better in the years to come. Lastly, I ask a question about history and biology. This book by the Israeli historian Yuval Harari is very interesting to read. A book called Sapiens. Harari, a historian, has a better understanding of biology than many biologists. He says the immense diversity of imagined realities that Sapiens invented and the resulting diversity of behavior patterns are the main components of what we call cultures. Once cultures appeared, they never cease to change and develop. And these unstoppable alterations are what we call history. Today, there is a great deal of discussion on history. The cognitive revolution is accordingly the point declared its independence from biology. About 30,000 years ago, all human beings were hunter-gatherers. They were no different from animals. It is only when they became stationary, after the invention of agriculture, the need to protect their fields, that societies begin to form. And here he says, to understand the rise of Christianity or the French Revolution, it is not enough to comprehend the interactions of genes, hormones, and organisms. It is necessary to take into account the interaction of ideas, images, and fantasies as well. Ideas, images, and fantasies are all products of the human mind, and therefore the cognitive revolution is extraordinarily important in understanding the connection between history and biology. Do cultures evolve? Cultures also evolve. Cultural transmission is more complex than genetic transmission. It occurs in shorter timescales. This is being addressed in the current scientific literature. Even within a single generation, there can be cultural evolution. Sometimes this evolution might appear to be retrograde. At other times, it might appear to be progressive. That is only relative. Can cultural evolution influence biological evolution? This question is interesting because the one question which was asked to Dr. Guleria was whether the RNA vaccine would in some way affect human evolution in the future. For much of human history, there was little reason to digest milk. after weaning. And so adults did not produce the enzyme that digests lactose. I show you chemistry and biology on the right-hand side of the slide. The disaccharide lactose, a major constituent of milk, now being broken down into glucose and galactose. But if the gene for lactase is switched off during human development, then adults do not produce lactase. They cannot digest lactose. But after dairy farming evolved tens of thousands of years ago, milk products began to be consumed. At that time, those people who could not digest milk, who did not have lactase persistence, they fell by the wayside, they died. Those who reproduced and moved on were those who had lactase persistence. This is a genetic alteration which allows the enzyme lactase to continue to be produced in adulthood. Today, if you look at this, in the Scandinavian countries, most people have lactase persistence. You go to the heart of Africa, most people cannot digest milk. Even in India, there's a large difference between populations in the north and populations in the south, where you will find that lactose intolerance is more common. This is an example of cultural evolution now driving and making a selection pressure on genetic evolution. So I have come to my last slide. You might ask, on this occasion, when we pay a tribute to Sri Manohar Parrikar, why do I draw your attention to such a disparate group of subjects? It is because of the environment, climatic, social, and political, in which we live today. Some reflection on the roles of chemistry and biology in shaping nature may allow us to introspect on the course of human history and attempt to understand why the world today is the way it is. I've been a scientist all my life. Science is a deeply humbling subject. I hope I have conveyed to you how any attempt to understand even the smallest of nature's creations can be deeply humbling. On my last slide, I just want to acknowledge the two institutions which have provided me a home all these years. The Indian Institute of Science on the top left for 41 years, and in my retirement, the National Center for Biological Sciences, which has provided me a home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Balram, for such a wonderful talk, letting us know the intricacies of wonders of biology and chemistry in shaping the evolutionary history of the world. It was really, really remarkable. Thank you very much. We have some questions. So one of the question is, how important is the evolutionary biology in understanding current virus attack and other diseases?
I think it is extraordinarily important. You must understand that human beings and all animals coexist with viruses. And they coexist often peacefully with viruses, but at other times, you occasionally have this rise of an extremely pathogenic virus. This is not the first pandemic, and this will not be the last pandemic. There will be pandemics also in the future. This is really because we have an enormous reservoir of viruses on Earth. And since you're in Goa, you must realize that the ocean is one of the largest reservoir of viruses. There are an enormous number of marine viruses in the ocean. If at some point marine viruses get transferred, after all, they infect other animals, they infect fishes, they infect other marine organisms. Viruses can jump, and this is what people call zoonotic transfer. And they can jump from animal to animal and from animal to human being. And this is what has happened in the current case. So understanding biological evolution is hugely important. You can understand biological evolution if you realize that Human beings are not central to biology. Human beings think that they are central to biology. Biology is independent of human beings. Human beings influence their environment. Very often they influence their environment in bad ways. And this is something we must understand.
Okay. So the next question is, what is the role of human, or say you can say anthropogenic activity in and its consequences?
Anthropogenic activity is in fact responsible for a great deal of our current problems. The climate change problem, which is widely discussed, although a very large number of people will also deny that there is climate change. These are really the consequences of anthropogenic activity. And as our fossil fuel burning, etc., keeps on increasing and we don't pay any attention to it, the atmosphere will get degraded over time. And this is important. For people who live on the coasts, sea level rise will be very important. And this is again something that one has to be very careful about. There is no denying that human beings have influenced the environment far more than any other animal. There is no other animal species which has really influenced the environment to the same extent. This is largely because of our ability to develop new technologies. But every new technology is a double-edged sword. There's a great deal of good, and there is also some level of what I would call bad.
Okay, sir. So last question actually is from my side. We always talk about evolution of life. Just now you were mentioning it happened about 3.5 billion years back, something started. And then something happened at say 2.7 or 2.6 billion years back when this blue algae, the cyanobacteria, learned the art of photosynthesis. So actually what happened exactly, is it possible to explain what exactly happened when photosynthesis started and cyanobacteria started doing that?
I know. You see, what happens is in evolution understanding, there is at the moment, I won't say you won't understand it in future, but at the moment there's an unbridgeable gulf between chemical evolution and biological evolution. How do you go from a large mixture of chemicals that might be available to the first living cell? And it is only as chemicals evolve will you be able to do new chemistry. Photosynthesis is new chemistry. You need the porphyrins in order to do photosynthesis. So you might have find conditions by which you can make porphyrins in an abiotic environment. But to go from there to photosynthesis is a long... there must be many things that we don't understand. Otherwise, science will come to an end. So, science is, as was said many years ago, an endless frontier. So, keeps receding as we ask more questions.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. So now I will hand over the mic to Dr. Norona.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balaram, for such a informative talk. In fact, when I heard Rachel Carson, I remember I read that book many years back on the Silent Spring and brought fresh memories to me. So before I end and deliver a formal vote of thanks, I'll just summarize exactly what Dr. Guleria and Professor Balaram said. So Dr. Guleria discussed all the issues that are being right now because of the COVID pandemic. What are the issues that are faced by all the medical sciences, the Indian people at large, and the world over? He spoke about how they have taken the testing very seriously, how they had teleconsultations, how they have new COVID patient care systems going on, how they train their staff, which numbered almost 13,000 employees, and basically a capacity building exercise, and how they created information and knowledge about how the pandemic could be controlled. Very informative. There were lively questions that were asked. He clarified them, and he had to leave. We had Professor Balram, very interesting. In fact, talking about science and nature, quoting William Wordsworth. And we talked about the 3 pillars of modern biology in genetics, in biology, and evolution. He talked about natural selection processes, the ascent of man, importance of chemistry. And then again about how famines were stopped because urea was created and the agricultural revolution came about. All led to us understanding better the humankind today. Thank you, Professor Balram, immensely on behalf of the organizing committee of Mr. Manohar Parrikar Vidnyan Mahotsav. We thank you, Professor Guleria, for this wonderful learning and teaching experience to all of us. I think I have to also thank the persons who are responsible for getting this function organized well. At the outset is the Honorable Chief Minister, his office, Upendra Joshi, who helped us getting Professor Dr. Guleria, NIO, led by Dr. Sunil Singh, who helped us to get Dr. Balram in the first place. We had Dr. Ragwan as well, Dr. Manke, to speak at the inaugural session. I can't forget the role played by Sujit Dongre, Levinson Martin, the director, NIO staff for having given us this facility, the advisory board members that comprise of all the directors, National NIT Director, Dr. Gopal Mugreya, Dr. Raghuram from BITS, Dr. Mishra was not able to be with us today because ill, IIT. And then, of course, NIO, Dr. Singh, once again, who has been central to all these talks that we have organized here. Last but not the least, Siddhi, who compared the program, all the other staff who work with the Solid Waste Management Corporation, Dominic, who I can see there. I can't recollect all the other names, but bear with me. Thank you once again. And we end this second edition of Mr. Manohar Parrikar's Mahotsav. And we look forward to seeing you again, perhaps in better times next year. Thank you once again.